He said, "I can't find a wife." And at dawn 3 Apache women arrived at his ranch. John woke before sunrise, as he did every morning, and stepped out onto the wide wooden porch of his small ranch house. The sky was still painted in soft shades of gray, and the air smelled of fresh earth and dew. A cold breeze brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of pine trees from the edge of the forest. John rubbed his hands together and let out a sigh. Another day had begun, and yet nothing in his life seemed to change. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and John had taken over the responsibilities after his father had passed away. The land was vast, stretching over rolling hills with green pastures where horses grazed and cattle wandered slowly. It was beautiful, peaceful, and yet lonely. Despite his hard work and dedication, John often felt the emptiness of the ranch more than its beauty. He missed the laughter of family, the warmth of someone by his side, and the shared moments that made life feel complete. Every day, he went through the motions of ranch life with precision. He fed the animals, checked the fences for breaks, cleaned the barn, and prepared the feed for the cattle. The work kept him busy, but it could not fill the quiet ache in his heart. John loved the ranch deeply, but no matter how much he worked, he knew that love could not replace companionship. His neighbors sometimes came by to check on him or share news from the nearby town. They were kind, but John could not help but notice the looks they gave him, some sympathetic, some curious, and some even amused. "Still alone, John?" they would ask gently with a smile. Each time he forced a smile back, but inside he felt a pang of sorrow. It wasn't that he didn't try. He had attended dances in the town, spoken to women passing through, and even placed a small notice in the market hoping to meet someone. Yet, every effort seemed to fizzle, leaving him feeling more isolated than before. This morning, as he leaned against the porch railing, John spoke aloud to the empty ranch. His voice was quiet but heavy with emotion. "I can't find a wife," he said. The words hung in the crisp morning air. He hadn't meant to say them out loud. It was almost like a confession to the world. But saying it made him feel slightly lighter, as though acknowledging his loneliness could somehow ease it. The birds chirped softly in response, indifferent to his sorrow. A squirrel darted across the yard, chasing after acorns, completely unaware of the human heart weighed down by longing. John watched the small animal with a faint smile. Life went on, even when it seemed like the world had forgotten you. John's thoughts drifted back to his youth. He remembered the dances at the town hall, where he had tried to gather courage to speak to the girls who caught his eye. He remembered Mary, with her bright eyes and laughter that could light up a room. He had been too shy, too awkward, and too unsure of himself. Over the years, opportunities came and went. Friends married and moved on, townsfolk settled into families, and John stayed behind, tending to the ranch and watching life unfold around him. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the melancholy that threatened to settle in for the day. Work could always help. He grabbed the bucket and headed toward the barn, the wooden floorboards creaking under his boots. The horses stirred as he entered, nickering softly, sensing his presence. John patted each of their noses in turn, whispering gentle words. "Morning, Silver, morning, Dusty. Let's get through another day, eh?" As he worked, John's mind wandered again. He imagined what it would be like to have someone to share this life with. Not just companionship for the sake of it, but a partner who understood the rhythm of ranch life, who could laugh at the challenges, and who could bring warmth to the cold mornings. Someone who could sit with him on this very porch, sharing stories while the sun rose over the hills. He thought of how nice it would be to cook dinner together after a long day, to talk about dreams and worries, to plan for the future side by side. The image made his heart ache, but it also gave him a small spark of hope. Perhaps one day someone would come, not by chance but as if fate had brought them together. The day moved slowly. John mended fences, checked the water troughs, and fed the chickens. He noticed how the sun began to break through the clouds, casting long shadows across the fields. The morning chores were exhausting, but they gave him a sense of purpose. Still, every task completed was a reminder that he had no one to share the rewards with. The barn was clean, the animals fed, and yet the silence lingered, heavy and unbroken. By late morning, John decided to take a walk along the ridge overlooking his ranch. He carried a small lunch with him, a piece of bread, some cheese, and an apple. As he sat on a large rock, looking out over the fields, he felt the wind on his face and the warmth of the sun on his shoulders. It was a beautiful day, the kind that made life seem full of possibilities. And yet, he felt a twinge of sorrow at the realization that he was alone. He thought about writing a letter, perhaps sending it to someone in a nearby town. He could explain who he was, what his life was like, and what he hoped for. But he hesitated. Letters felt formal, impersonal. Life was not about paper and ink. It was about moments, laughter, and shared experiences. And he had so few of those to offer. As he walked back to the ranch house, John passed by the old oak tree near the edge of the pasture. Its branches stretched wide, leaves rustling in the breeze. He paused and placed a hand on the rough bark, feeling its solidity and strength. "You've been here through everything," he murmured. "And so have I, but I wish someone else could share it with me." Returning to the porch, he looked at the horizon once more. The clouds were tinged with gold, promising another bright day. John took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. Life on the ranch was not easy, and finding a wife might never happen. But he had work to do, animals to care for, and hope, small but persistent, that someday someone would come into his life, bringing companionship and joy. He went inside to fetch water for the garden, humming a soft tune under his breath. The house was quiet, but it was his sanctuary. Every piece of furniture, every tool, every corner of the home had a story to tell. And while it was quiet now, John believed that it would not always be so. Perhaps fate had a plan he could not yet see. As the sun climbed higher, John prepared for the day's main chores, feeding the cattle, repairing the broken fence by the creek, and checking the barn roof for leaks. He worked steadily, sweat dripping from his forehead, muscles straining, but his mind kept returning to the same thought, the longing for companionship. The loneliness was a constant shadow, but it was not despair. It was a reminder of what he hoped to find, and that hope gave him a reason to keep going, even on the hardest days. By evening, John sat once again on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking sight that reminded him of the beauty of the world he lived in. He reached for his notebook and began to write, not letters, but thoughts and memories. Memories of childhood, of his father's wisdom, of neighbors' laughter, and even of small dreams that had never come true. As night fell, the stars began to appear, twinkling above the quiet ranch. John looked up and whispered to the sky, "I don't know when, but I hope someone will come. Someone who understands, someone who cares, someone who can be here with me." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying his words into the darkness. John went inside, feeling a little lighter than he had all day. The ranch was still quiet, but he was not defeated. He had hope, and that was enough to face another day, another morning, another sunrise that might change his life forever. Little did John know that his words had been heard, not by humans but by fate itself. A new chapter of his life was about to begin, and it would come in the most unexpected way. The next morning, John woke with the same routine, expecting another quiet day on the ranch. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting soft light over the fields, when he noticed something unusual on the horizon. A faint dust cloud floated above the ground, moving steadily toward his ranch. At first he thought it might be a group of cattle from a neighbor's farm, but as it grew closer, he realized it was something very different. 3 figures appeared through the haze, walking with confidence and grace. John squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. They were women, moving quickly yet purposefully, and they seemed entirely self-reliant. Each carried a small bundle, tied carefully with cloth, and they walked with a quiet strength that commanded attention. John's heart raced. He had seen travelers pass by before, but never anyone who approached his ranch in such a determined way. He hurried down from the porch, brushing his hands on his pants, and stepped toward the fence. "Hello," he called, trying to sound calm despite the surprise that made his voice shake. "Can I help you?" The women paused, lifting their heads, and for a moment John was taken aback by their appearance. Their clothes were practical, made for traveling and survival, and their eyes were sharp and alert. They didn't look like they belonged to the town or any of the neighboring farms. There was something unfamiliar about them, something strong and proud. One of the women stepped forward. She had long dark hair tied neatly, and her eyes were steady and observing. "We are travelers," she said in a clear, strong voice. "We saw your ranch and thought we might rest here." Her English was perfect, but there was a tone in her voice that suggested she had grown up speaking another language as well. John blinked, unsure how to respond. Travelers did not often stop at his isolated ranch. The nearest town was miles away, and most people preferred inns or small cabins along the main road. "Of course," he said finally, regaining his composure. "You are welcome to rest here. Come in." The women nodded politely and approached. As they entered the yard, John noticed the way they moved with care, almost in harmony with the land. It was clear they were used to traveling and surviving in the wilderness. He felt a strange mix of awe and nervousness. He had lived among animals, trees, and open fields his entire life, but meeting people like this, people so independent and confident, was different from anything he had experienced. He led them to a small clearing near the house, offering them water and a place to sit. They accepted politely, and John watched as they arranged their bundles neatly. There was a calmness about them, a quiet strength that made him feel both curious and humbled. One of the women, the tallest of the three, smiled slightly and said, "We heard of your kindness from travelers who pass through this area. They said you treat your animals well and work hard on your land." John's eyes widened. News of his small acts of care had traveled this far. He had always thought of himself as ordinary, but now he realized that perhaps people did notice, and that reputation could reach places he had never imagined. John laughed nervously. "I just do what I can. The ranch is my life. Thank you for your kind words." He paused, then added almost shyly, "I'm John. It's nice to meet you." The women introduced themselves in turn. Their names were Aeon, the tallest, calm and observant; Naeli, the youngest, with quick movements and a lively curiosity; and Kiona, strong and practical, who seemed to be the leader of the group. John noticed how they complemented each other, each bringing a unique presence to the small space of his yard. For a while, no one spoke much. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sounds of birds and the faint hum of the nearby creek. John felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had spent so long alone that the presence of others, especially women, felt unfamiliar and almost unreal. Yet there was no danger in their arrival, only the promise of something new, something he had never expected. As the morning sun climbed higher, John decided to show them around the ranch. He led them to the barn first, explaining the daily routines and introducing the animals. The horses nickered softly as they approached, and the women reached out gently to touch them. Naeli laughed quietly as Dusty, a young horse, nudged her hand, and John found himself smiling at her delight. "This is impressive," Aeon said, her voice calm but full of admiration. "You take care of your land and animals very well. It must be a lot of work alone." John nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and vulnerability. "It is," he admitted. "It's rewarding but also lonely at times. I'm used to it, though." He hesitated, then added, "I've never had anyone else to share it with." The women exchanged glances, and Kiona spoke gently. Sometimes companionship comes when you least expect it. Perhaps that is why we are here." Her words carried wisdom and mystery, leaving John both curious and thoughtful. After the tour, they helped him with chores. Naomi assisted with feeding the chickens, laughing at their antics. Kiona helped mend a broken fence, showing skill and strength that John admired. Aon carefully tended to the garden, showing a deep respect for the land and the plants. Watching them work, John realized that these women were not just travelers. They were capable, intelligent, and resourceful. Their presence transformed the ranch from a quiet, lonely place into a space full of energy, skill, and life. By noon, they gathered under the shade of the old oak tree. John brought out bread, cheese, and water for a simple meal. They shared stories of their travels, speaking of forests, rivers, and distant towns they had seen. John listened intently, fascinated by their experiences and amazed at how different their lives had been from his own. He realized that the world was much larger than his ranch, and yet, somehow, these travelers had found their way to him. Aon spoke of survival and courage, of learning to trust oneself in unfamiliar lands. Naomi spoke with curiosity about people she had met and the lessons she had learned from them. Kiona spoke of responsibility and the importance of working together to overcome challenges. John felt inspired by their stories, understanding that there was much to learn, even after years spent living alone. As the afternoon sun began to wane, John noticed a change within himself. The fear of loneliness that had weighed on him for so long now felt lighter. The women's presence, their laughter, and their energy brought a warmth to the ranch that he had never felt before. He realized that companionship could appear in unexpected forms, not necessarily in romance, but in friendship, trust, and shared experiences. He walked with them to the edge of the pasture, showing them the view of the hills and forests beyond. The women admired the landscape, pointing out the subtle beauty of the land, the way sunlight touched the trees, and the peacefulness of the open fields. John felt a connection not only with them but with the land itself, renewed by their presence and their appreciation for it. As evening approached, they helped John prepare a small fire near the porch. The warmth of the flames and the soft crackle of burning wood created a comforting atmosphere. They cooked a simple meal together, sharing bread, roasted vegetables, and freshly drawn water. Conversation flowed easily, laughter echoed across the ranch, and John felt a happiness he had not known in years. By the time the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, John realized something remarkable. His life, once quiet and solitary, now felt alive with possibilities. The women had arrived unexpectedly, without warning, and yet their presence had brought energy, wisdom, and companionship. It was a reminder that life could surprise you when you least expect it, and that the world was full of people whose paths might cross yours for a reason. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, John looked at the women and smiled. "I don't know how or why you came here," he said softly, "but I am grateful. You've made this ranch feel alive again." Aon smiled gently, Naomi laughed quietly, and Kiona nodded. "Sometimes life brings people together for a short while," Kiona said. "But even a short time can change everything." John sat back, gazing at the vast sky above. For the first time in years, he felt that the loneliness that had shadowed him for so long was not permanent. He had been given a gift, unexpected, unplanned, and extraordinary. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he knew that the ranch and his life would never feel the same again. As night fully settled over the land, the ranch glowed softly in the moonlight. The three women had made it a place of warmth, laughter, and learning. And John, once lonely and uncertain, now felt hope stirring within him, a hope that perhaps life had more surprises in store than he had ever imagined. The next morning, John woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The ranch had never felt so lively. Birds sang louder, the horses seemed more spirited, and even the old oak tree near the pasture appeared somehow more vibrant. But what truly made his heart lighter were the three women who had arrived unexpectedly the day before. Their presence had brought not only energy and laughter, but also a quiet wisdom that John had not realized he was missing. He stepped outside and saw Aeon already tending to the garden, her hands moving carefully as she checked the soil and the small sprouts pushing through it. Naeli was nearby, gathering eggs from the chicken coop, moving with a lively, careful grace. Kiona was working on repairing a section of the barn fence that John had been meaning to fix for weeks. Watching them, John felt a mixture of admiration and humility. These women were not just visitors, they were capable, skilled, and strong. "Good morning," John called, his voice carrying across the yard. The women looked up and smiled, their expressions warm but alert. "Good morning, John," Aeon replied. "The land seems to respond to care," she added, nodding toward the garden. John walked over and picked up a small watering can. "It's nothing compared to your skills," he said, trying to hide the nervous excitement in his voice. "I could use your help, though. The crops need watering, and the sun will be harsh soon." Aeon nodded and followed him, while Naeli and Kiona continued with their tasks. Together, they moved through the garden, checking each plant, ensuring that none were struggling under the morning sun. As they worked, John noticed how different it felt to have company. Simple chores became enjoyable, and he realized that sharing even the smallest responsibilities could bring a sense of connection he had never felt before. When the watering was done, they paused under the shade of the oak tree. Aeon handed John a cloth to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "You work very hard," she said softly. "It is clear you care deeply for this land." John smiled, a bit embarrassed by the praise. "I do," he admitted, "but it's a lot of work. Sometimes it feels lonely, though." He hesitated, then added, "I've never had someone to share it with, to teach me new ways, to talk with me about the little things in life." The women exchanged glances, and Kiona spoke. "Loneliness is part of life for many people," she said, "but sharing knowledge, work, and stories can bridge that gap. That is why we are here. We travel not only to see the world, but to learn from it and from those we meet." Naeli, the youngest, tilted her head curiously. "And to learn from each other," she added. Her voice was soft, but there was a spark of curiosity that made John smile. He realized that learning was not just about skills or work. It was about understanding one another, forming bonds, and seeing the world through someone else's eyes. The rest of the morning passed quickly as John and the women continued working around the ranch. They repaired broken boards, swept the barn, and fed the animals together. John noticed how efficiently they worked, each woman bringing her unique approach to the tasks at hand. Aeon was precise and careful, Naeli was quick and creative, and Kiona was strong and practical. Watching them, John realized how much he had missed by working alone all these years. By noon, John decided it was time to take a break. He prepared a simple meal, bread, cheese, and some fruits from the garden. They sat together under the shade, sharing food and stories. Aeon spoke about the forest she had traveled through, the plants she had learned to cultivate, and the ways she had learned to care for the land. John listened intently, amazed by her knowledge. Naeli shared stories of towns she had visited, the people she had met, and the small lessons she had learned along the way. She spoke with humor and curiosity, making John laugh and bringing a lightness to his heart he had not felt in years. Kiona, practical and grounded, spoke about survival, responsibility, and the importance of working together. Her words were simple, but they carried wisdom that John could not ignore. He found himself reflecting on her advice, realizing that it could be applied not only to ranch work, but to life itself. After the meal, John suggested they explore a nearby creek. The women agreed, and together they walked through the fields, the soft grass brushing against their boots. The creek was clear and cool, winding gently through the land. John watched as the women knelt by the water, feeling it with their hands, and then laughing as they splashed a little. Naeli tried to catch a small fish, while Aeon examined the stones and plants along the bank. John felt a warmth in his chest he had never experienced alone. The laughter, the shared curiosity, and the sense of discovery reminded him of the joys of companionship. He realized that life was not just about survival or hard work. It was about connection, learning, and the small moments that made each day meaningful. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they returned to the ranch. John noticed a change in himself. The loneliness that had weighed on him for so long was replaced by a sense of belonging. These women had come unexpectedly, yet their presence had brought balance, joy, and a new rhythm to his life. He decided to show them more of the ranch, leading them to the pasture where the horses grazed. Aeon and Kiona helped him clean the stables, while Naeli played with a young foal, laughing as it nuzzled her hand. John realized that he had never felt this kind of harmony before: work, companionship, and nature blending together in a perfect moment. As evening approached, John built a small fire outside the house. The women gathered around, helping him prepare a simple meal of roasted vegetables and bread. The fire crackled softly, and the stars began to appear in the sky. They ate slowly, sharing stories of past travels, hopes for the future, and small memories from their childhoods. John felt as if he were discovering a whole new world, one filled with friendship, learning, and understanding. After dinner, they sat quietly by the fire. John looked at each of the women and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "I don't know how you found your way here," he said softly, "but I am grateful. You've shown me that life can be richer and more meaningful when shared with others." Aeon smiled gently. "Sometimes life brings people together for reasons we do not immediately understand," she said. "The important thing is to learn from each other and make the most of the time you have." Naeli nodded eagerly. "And to enjoy it," she added with a playful grin, making John laugh. Kiona looked at him seriously. "Work, care, and respect for the land and for each other, these are what make life strong and meaningful. You have shown that in your dedication to this ranch." John realized that the women had not only helped him with his work, but had also opened his mind and heart. He understood now that companionship was not limited to romantic relationships. It could be friendship, guidance, shared experience, and the simple joy of being with people who respected and cared for one another. As night fell, John went to bed with a sense of peace he had not felt in years. The ranch was no longer a quiet, lonely place. It was alive with the presence of the three women, their laughter, their work, and the lessons they had shared. He knew that the days ahead would be filled with learning, growth, and perhaps even more surprises. He drifted off to sleep, thinking about the creek, the garden, the fire, and the shared stories. For the first time, he felt that he was part of a small, temporary community, a community that had appeared unexpectedly and brought warmth, wisdom, and friendship into his life. In the days that followed, John and the women continued to work together, learning from one another in ways both big and small. They discovered the rhythms of each other's lives, the skills that could be shared, and the joy of cooperation. John taught them about the ranch, the care of animals, and the work required to maintain the land. In return, they taught him about the forests, plants, and ways to approach life with curiosity, respect, and resilience. The ranch became a place of learning and laughter. Morning chores were filled with conversation, afternoon tasks with shared problem-solving, and evenings with stories and reflection. John realized that he had been lonely not because he lacked people, but because he had never experienced this kind of meaningful connection. By the end of the week, John felt transformed. His heart, once heavy with solitude, now held hope, friendship, and a sense of belonging. The women's arrival had not only changed his daily life, but had also reshaped the way he saw the world. The ranch was no longer just a place to live. It was a place to grow, to learn, and to share. And while John did not yet know what the future held, he understood that life had a way of bringing people together for reasons beyond his understanding. The important thing was to embrace the moments, the lessons, and the companionship that came, even if unexpectedly. Days passed on the ranch, and life had taken on a rhythm that John had never imagined possible. The mornings were filled with sunlight, work, and laughter. The afternoons stretched lazily across the fields and pastures, while evenings glowed with the warmth of the fire and shared stories. The presence of Aeon, Nayeli, and Kiona had brought a new energy to the ranch, one that John had never experienced in his solitary life. It was during these days that John began to truly understand the depth of their wisdom. The women were not just travelers passing through. They were teachers in their own right, bringing lessons from a culture that respected the land, the animals, and the connections between people. John watched them carefully, realizing that there was much he could learn if he only paid attention. One morning, as the sun rose slowly over the hills, Aeon suggested that they visit a small clearing near the edge of the forest. "There is a place where we can sit, talk, and learn," she said gently. Curious, John agreed, and they all walked together through the tall grass, the sound of birdsong accompanying their steps. The clearing was beautiful. Soft green moss covered the ground, sunlight filtered through the branches, and a small stream ran gently along the edge. Aeon motioned for John to sit. "The land has lessons," she explained. "If you listen, if you observe, it can teach you patience, respect, and understanding." John listened intently, realizing that he had often overlooked the subtle messages of the land. He had worked tirelessly on the ranch, caring for animals and crops, yet he had rarely paused to consider the deeper meaning of his actions or the lessons the land could offer. Nayeli sat cross-legged nearby, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "And people too," she added. "We learn from each other, from stories, from kindness. Life is about noticing what is around you and understanding it fully." John nodded, feeling a quiet awe at the simplicity and truth of her words. Kiona spoke next, her voice steady and practical. "Strength is important," she said, "but not just in work or survival. Strength is knowing how to care, how to listen, and how to share. You have strength, John, but you can learn how to use it with others, not only for yourself." John felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that he had spent much of his life working alone, believing that independence meant doing everything by himself. Yet, here were these women, showing him that true strength also came from collaboration, from respect, and from shared experience. As the morning turned into afternoon, they worked together to prepare a small area in the clearing for planting. Aeon showed John how to observe the soil, how to plant seeds with care, and how to anticipate the needs of each plant. Nayeli added her own knowledge, suggesting ways to protect the young sprouts from pests and harsh sunlight. Kiona helped with the heavy lifting, clearing stones and preparing the ground. John followed their guidance, learning not only practical skills but also the deeper meaning behind each action. Planting was not just about growing food. It was about patience, observation, and understanding the life around him. He felt a connection to the land that went beyond work. It was a bond, quiet but powerful, that made him feel part of something larger. After they had finished, they sat by the stream to rest. The water flowed gently, clear and cool, reflecting the sunlight. John dipped his hand into the stream, feeling the chill against his skin. "I never realized how much I was missing," he said softly. "I worked hard, but I never thought about the life around me or how to understand it." Aeon smiled, her eyes calm and knowing. "Life is full of lessons," she said. "You only need to pay attention and be willing to learn. The land, the animals, and the people around you all have wisdom to share." Nayeli laughed lightly. "And sometimes the lessons come in unexpected ways," she added, glancing at John with a playful smile. He felt a sense of joy and humility, realizing that he had much to learn, but that the journey itself was part of the reward. Over the next few days, the women continued to share their traditions and knowledge. They taught John simple rituals of respect for the land, such as walking quietly through the forest to observe the animals without disturbing them, or tending to plants with careful attention to their needs. John listened and practiced, amazed at how much more alive the ranch felt when he was mindful of these small details. One afternoon, as they rested near the barn, Kiona spoke about the importance of storytelling. "Stories carry lessons," she explained. "They teach about courage, patience, and understanding. When we share stories, we connect with each other and with the world." John was intrigued. He had never thought of stories in this way, not just as entertainment, but as a way to learn and connect. That evening, they sat around the fire and shared stories from their lives. Aeon spoke of her family, the forests where she had grown up, and the lessons she had learned from observing the natural world. Naeli told of her travels through distant towns, the people she had met, and the small kindnesses that had left lasting impressions on her heart. Kiona shared practical stories about survival, responsibility, and the importance of helping others in need. John listened, captivated. He realized that these stories were more than just tales. They were lessons in life, carefully woven with meaning and experience. He began to share some of his own stories, speaking of his childhood on the ranch, the animals he had cared for, and the struggles he had faced living alone. The women listened with interest and empathy, offering gentle guidance and encouragement. Through these stories, John began to understand the power of connection. He saw that life was richer when experiences were shared, and that wisdom could come from both teaching and listening. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a classroom, a home, and a space for growth. The women also taught John about the value of patience and observation. One morning, they led him to a nearby hill where they observed a group of deer grazing in the distance. Aeon whispered, "Watch quietly. Learn from their movements how they interact with the land and each other. There is a lesson in everything around you." John followed her guidance, and as he observed, he began to notice small details. The way the deer moved, how they communicated, and how they adapted to the environment. It was a lesson in awareness, patience, and respect for life. He realized that he had been so focused on work and survival that he had overlooked these simple but profound truths. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between John and the women deepened. They laughed together, worked together, and learned from one another. John felt a sense of gratitude he had never known. He realized that companionship was not just about having someone by your side. It was about shared experience, mutual respect, and the joy of learning from each other. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John looked around the ranch. The fields were tended, the animals cared for, and the women worked quietly, each immersed in their tasks. He felt a deep sense of peace and belonging. The ranch was no longer just his home. It was a place of learning, friendship, and growth. Aeon approached him, her expression calm. "You have learned much," she said softly, "but remember, learning never ends. Life always has more to teach, and there will always be new challenges and joys." Naeli laughed lightly. "And sometimes the lessons are the most unexpected," she added, her eyes twinkling. Kiona nodded in agreement. "Use what you have learned wisely. Care for the land, care for the animals, and care for the people around you. That is the true strength of life." John smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart. He realized that he had been given a rare gift, the chance to learn from others, to experience companionship, and to see life through a new lens. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, had become a place of growth, understanding, and connection. As night fell and the stars appeared, John felt a sense of hope and anticipation. He did not know what the future held, but he understood that life had a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. The lessons he had learned from Aeon, Naeli, and Kiona would stay with him forever, shaping not only the way he cared for the ranch, but also the way he approached life itself. And so, the days continued on the ranch, filled with work, laughter, learning, and connection. John felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known. He realized that life was not just about survival or hard work. It was about understanding, respect, and the bonds formed with those who cross your path. The women had arrived unexpectedly, but their presence had changed everything, teaching him that friendship, wisdom, and love for the land could transform even the loneliest of hearts. The days on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. John woke each morning to the sound of birds, the soft nickering of horses, and the gentle movements of Aeon, Naeli, and Kiona. Their presence had brought life to the ranch, transforming it from a place of loneliness into a space filled with energy, learning, and warmth. He could hardly remember the days when he had lived alone, performing chores in silence and ending the day with an empty house around him. But one morning, as the sun rose over the hills and painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, John noticed a quiet mood among the women. Aeon moved with her usual calm, but her eyes seemed distant. Naeli was cheerful but spoke less than usual, and Kiona, ever practical and grounded, seemed deep in thought. John felt a small pang of worry in his chest, sensing that change was coming. They gathered for breakfast under the old oak tree, the morning air crisp and full of promise. John prepared the meal with his usual care, bread, fresh fruits, and cheese from the garden. But this morning, the usual laughter was softer, tinged with an unspoken emotion. Aeon finally spoke, her voice calm but deliberate. "John, we have learned much here, and you have shown us kindness, patience, and strength. But our journey must continue. We cannot stay forever." John felt a mixture of surprise and sadness. He had grown so accustomed to their presence that the thought of the ranch without them was almost unbearable. "Must you go?" he asked softly, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. Naeli reached over and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We must," she said. "We travel to learn, to experience, and to help others along the way. But our time here has been meaningful, and we will never forget it." Kiona nodded. "This ranch and you, John, have given us as much as we have given you. We have shared work, stories, and lessons. Now it is time for us to continue our journey, and for you to take what you have learned and live fully in your life." John struggled to find words. He had grown so attached to their presence that he could hardly imagine facing the days ahead alone. Yet as he looked at their faces, he realized that their departure was not an end. It was a continuation of the lessons they had shared. Life, like the land, moved forward. Change was part of that rhythm, and he had learned to embrace it. The women helped John prepare for their departure, packing their bundles carefully and checking that everything was in order. The ranch felt different with them moving about, more alive, more purposeful, yet tinged with the sadness of impending farewell. John worked alongside them, feeling the familiar bond of cooperation, knowing that these moments were both precious and fleeting. Before leaving, they gathered in the clearing near the stream, a place where so many lessons had been learned. Aeon spoke first, her voice gentle and thoughtful. "Remember what we have shared. The land has lessons, the animals have lessons, and people have lessons. Listen, observe, and act with care." Naeli smiled warmly, her eyes bright despite the emotion she felt. "And remember the joy of discovery. Life is full of surprises, and sometimes the best moments come when you least expect them. Keep your heart open, John." Kiona, strong and practical, added, "Use your strength wisely. Care for the land, care for the animals, and care for those around you. The lessons you have learned here will guide you through the days ahead." John nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I will," he said softly. "I promise. You have changed my life more than you will ever know. The ranch, the work, the lessons, they are all richer because of you." The women hugged him briefly, their embrace filled with warmth and respect. Then, as the sun climbed higher, they set off down the path that led from the ranch to the wider world. John watched them disappear into the distance, feeling a strange mixture of loss and gratitude. Their laughter, their wisdom, and their presence would be missed, but he knew that the lessons they had shared would remain with him forever. After they left, the ranch felt quiet again. The horses grazed peacefully, the chickens clucked softly, and the wind rustled through the trees. John walked through the fields, touching the plants and animals with a renewed sense of purpose. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full of memory, reflection, and hope. He remembered Aon's words about listening to the land, Naeli's encouragement to embrace life's surprises, and Kiona's advice about strength and care. John spent the next few days tending to the ranch with renewed energy. He repaired fences, cleaned barns, and cared for the animals with more attention than ever before. Each task felt meaningful, not because of obligation, but because of the lessons he had learned from the women. Their guidance had shown him that life was richer when approached with care, patience, and understanding. He also began to reflect more deeply on his own experiences and dreams. He realized that his time with Aon, Naeli, and Kiona had taught him about friendship, resilience, and the importance of human connection. He thought about the joy of sharing work, learning from others, and embracing change. These lessons had transformed him, giving him confidence and hope for the future. In the evenings, John would sit on the porch, looking at the stars and thinking of the three women. He imagined them traveling through forests and towns, continuing their journey, and hoped they were safe and happy. Their presence had left a lasting mark on his heart, and he knew that the ranch would forever carry memories of their time together. One afternoon, as John repaired a section of fence, he paused to watch the sun dip behind the hills. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, reflecting off the small creek nearby. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had grown stronger, wiser, and more connected to the land and life around him. John also began to reach out to the community around him. He spoke with neighbors, helped travelers passing through, and shared his knowledge of the ranch and the land. He realized that connection was not limited to those who stayed with him, but could extend to everyone around him. The lessons he had learned from the women inspired him to build a life that was open, generous, and full of understanding. He began to write again, keeping a journal of his thoughts, experiences, and reflections. He recorded the lessons from Aon, Naeli, and Kiona, the small joys of ranch life, and the discoveries he made each day. Writing became a way to honor their teachings and ensure that their presence continued to influence his life, even in their absence. As weeks turned into months, John felt a transformation within himself. The loneliness that had once weighed heavily on his heart had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose, gratitude, and hope. He had learned to embrace the unpredictability of life, the beauty of connection, and the value of learning from others. The ranch, once quiet and solitary, was now a place of growth, reflection, and meaningful work. John also discovered the joy of helping others. He assisted neighboring farmers, shared advice with young travelers, and offered guidance to those seeking knowledge about ranch life. He realized that life's lessons were not meant to be kept to oneself. They were meant to be shared, just as the women had shared their wisdom with him. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant hues, John sat on the porch with a sense of contentment. The ranch was peaceful, the animals rested, and the memories of Aon, Naeli, and Kiona filled his heart with warmth. He understood now that life's greatest gifts often come unexpectedly, and that the connections we form, even briefly, can leave a lasting impact. John smiled, thinking of the women and the lessons they had taught him. He felt gratitude for their presence, hope for the future, and a renewed sense of purpose. The ranch was no longer just a home, it was a place of growth, learning, and connection. And while the women had moved on, their influence remained, shaping the way he lived, worked, and embraced the world around him. He whispered softly to the evening sky, "Thank you." Thank you for bringing them here, and thank you for teaching me how to live fully." The wind rustled through the trees as if answering him, and John felt a quiet peace settle over the ranch. Life continued as it always does. Days were filled with work, learning, and the occasional laughter of neighbors and travelers passing through. John continued to honor the lessons he had learned, tending the land with care, helping those in need, and embracing the connections that life offered. The ranch, once lonely, had become a place of life, wisdom, and meaning, a living testament to the unexpected gifts of companionship, friendship, and learning. And though Aeon, Naeli, and Kiona were no longer there in person, John carried their presence in his heart. Their lessons shaped every action, every thought, and every moment. The ranch had been transformed, and so had he. The loneliness that had once seemed permanent was replaced by understanding, resilience, and hope. John realized that life, like the land, is ever-changing. People come and go, seasons shift, and challenges arise. But the lessons, connections, and experiences we carry with us remain, guiding us, inspiring us, and shaping the path forward. And with that understanding, John faced each new day with confidence, gratitude, and the quiet knowledge that he was never truly alone.